Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I am Ronald Kato. This week, after years of campaigning, the African Union may be closer than ever to getting a seat in the G20. But what do the continent's 55 countries stand to benefit? We also report from Nigeria on how smallholder farmers are using technology for better yields. Through their mobile phones, the farmers receive tips on pest and disease control and weather updates. Also, Uganda goes after Netflix, Facebook and Google by imposing a levy on their income. Opponents of the tax say the move hurts the growth of the digital economy. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. The G20 is increasingly the forum where key global governance issues are discussed. So what makes it so influential? G20 countries represent around 85% of global GDP, 75% of global trade, and about 2/3 of the world population. That the African Union is not a member has been cited as a dent on the G20's credibility. And now there are signs that the 55-nation grouping could become the 21st member as soon as September.
In recent years, the G20 has become the forum where critical global governance issues such as climate change, pandemics, security, and debt are discussed. Since 2020, however, African countries facing debt difficulties have ran to the G20 to seek relief, with Chad and Zambia successfully managing to reach agreements with their creditors. In recent years, calls to admit the African Union, AU, as a full member of the G20 have grown louder. Proponents say by not granting the 55-nation bloc a seat, the G20 loses credibility and fails in diversity. Currently, G20 has only one African nation, South Africa, while 5 countries from Europe are members, as well as the European Union. But for the very first time, Africa's membership bid has received backing from the US, China and France. India, the holder of the G20 presidency, has written to its counterparts to propose the admission of the AU as a member at the upcoming summit in September.
Jude Moore is a senior policy fellow at the Center for Global Development. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Broadly speaking, what does G20 membership benefit Africa?
More and more of global governance issues are being handled at subgrouping levels. And so for African governments and African institutions looking to continue to have a voice and a say in issues of global governance, it makes sense that they will seek membership in the new fora that are emerging to resolve global issues. And G20 happens to be one of the most important ones. We saw during the COVID pandemic, the G20 was the organization that initiated the debt service suspension. So for African governments, not having the continent adequately represented there has always been a weakness. And so this is something they've tried to solve.
Should the AU get a seat in the G20 in September, what ideas should it bring to the table regarding, say, debt and financing for development for developing countries?
Different African presidents have made the exact same point. The South African president made that point. President Ruto of Kenya made that point. President Hichilema of Zambia made that point. And the head of the African Development Bank, president of the African Development Bank, made that point. And they keep stressing that the global architecture for financing development is not working in Africa's favor and it needs to change. They have ideas of what that change will look like. So one of the first things I think will be brought on the table, because now it seems like almost that most of the continent's leaders and institutions are reading from the same page, that it's going to be, how do we tackle the issue of financing development? How do we tackle issues of debt? That the global architecture of how we do business, how we do development has to change in a way that doesn't disadvantage Africa and low-income countries. So I think that's one of the issues they're going to put on the table.
And what should the African Union's proposals be on climate change, the energy transition, and the use of oil and gas in Africa's energy mix?
So one, on the issue of climate change, that because Africa is historically not a contributor, and because currently Africa's contribution to global emissions is so small, Africa is actually in a strong position. However, as Africa becomes more wealthy, Africa's energy use is definitely going to rise. So one is guaranteeing that the continent can continue to use the assets it has, especially when it comes to natural gas in its transition, so that some fossil fuel is in Africa's energy mix to the transition. I think that's one of the points. Finally, I would say, if we have the African Union now at the G20 speaking on behalf of Africa, then there will need to be coordination in Africa so that the things that the AU say at this forum actually reflects what African governments want.
Jude, when you have France, Germany and Italy as members of the G20 on top of the European Union, is it enough to just have South Africa and the African Union, or should Africa demand more?
Obviously, it would be in Africa's interest if we can increase the membership there. But part of the justification for the EU being there is because the EU acts as a unit. And we still haven't gotten there yet when it comes to the African Union. But having an African Union seat is definitely important. I think, African governments should qualify to be in that setting based on the size and the growth of their economies, and not simply because, it is more equal. No one creates a global organization and says China is not going to be there, India is not going to be there. Well, because the power of their economies and the size of their population account for them. And as much as we want more seats when it comes to these international organizations and international arrangements, I think it should reflect not just the size of our population, but also the size of our economy. And I think we're headed in that direction with the AFCFTA.
Jude Moore, very insightful. Nice to have you. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
A scheme to provide extension services to farmers in rural Nigeria using mobile phones is helping to increase productivity. Farmers receive timely information on pest and disease control, management tips, and prices.
Nearly half of Nigerians live in rural areas where the primary occupation is farming. The Rural Farmers Hub encourages farmers by achieving higher levels of productivity through innovative information technology. The hub says it has supported about 25,000 farmers, resulting in an increase of about 35% yield and about 20% in income.
We have what we call a proprietary algorithm. We designed a software that is able to process this big data into very simple insights for the farmers to be able to apply on their farm. Now, these insights are also given to the farmers via voice, SMS, and also in their local languages.
Many young people don't consider farming as decent work in most African countries because it is done manually. The group says it wants to change this with Capture, a mobile app that enables anyone to start and manage a farm digitally from a mobile phone.
With a growing rate of technology across the world, to be able to scale and reach out to a large number of your customer target, you need a technology that is cost efficient and also scalable. The mobile app technology enables us to be able to do that.
Some farmers say the technology has helped them in producing more. I've been taught how to farm with the app and I'm getting a good harvest. The hub says solving this challenge through precision agriculture is their goal.
Now, Uganda has passed a new tax law which imposes a 5% levy on income made by tech giants Netflix, Facebook, and Google in the country. But opponents of the tax say the move hurts the growth of the digital economy.
Non-resident providers of digital services like Twitter, Amazon, and Netflix, Facebook's parent company Meta, and car-hailing services will be subjected to the new tax.
The 5% that we levy here is part of the portion of the revenue they have earned.
The government hopes to collect about $1.4 million from digital service providers, while the much-needed revenue could be used to pay off a mounting public debt. there are growing concerns over the tax implications.
When you purport now also tax the provider, indirectly you are going to tax the user.
Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, some of the African countries already imposing a tax on non-resident digital service providers. But digital experts argue a growing taxable digital environment would facilitate proper implementation of the tax regulations in Uganda.
We need to make ourselves an enabling country. Before, if you compare ourselves to, let's say, Nigeria, to Kenya and the other key markets across Africa, they have done a lot more to create the ecosystem that then enables them to raise revenue across the board.
According to the Global Digital Insight statistics, there were close to 12 million internet users in Uganda at the start of the year. And the government is keen to tap into the growing number of internet users to widen its revenue base.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa. I am Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.